A week after I moved into my new house, the previous owner called me in a panic. I will never forget the sheer terror in his voice. He said he completely forgot to turn off the living room security camera. His voice was trembling so hard I could barely understand his words. He saw something on the footage from the night before about my son-in-law. "You need to see this immediately," he pleaded. "Do not tell a single soul." "Come alone right now," he insisted. When I arrived, he played a video that shattered my reality and made me collapse. If you are watching this video right now, take a deep breath. If you think the people closest to you are your safest harbor, you might want to reconsider. Sometimes the most dangerous monsters are sitting at your dinner table pouring your morning coffee. Keep listening to my story, because what I discovered will shake you to your core. Drop a like right now if you are truly ready for the absolute truth. Please leave a comment telling me where you are watching from. It means the world to me. My name is Bill. I am 79 years old. For 40 years, I broke my back building a massive oil logistics company right here in Texas. I gave my sweat and tears to ensure my family would never worry about anything. I worked long hours, missed birthdays, and sacrificed my own youth. I recently retired and handed the keys to my empire over to the next generation. I moved out of my estate and bought a quiet home in Austin. I thought I was surrounded by family who loved me. I was dead wrong. The phone call from Gary Jenkins, the man who sold me the Austin house, shattered that peaceful illusion. When I pulled into Gary's driveway, my hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. A sickening knot formed in my stomach. Gary was waiting for me on his front porch. He looked pale as if he had seen a ghost. He did not say a word when I walked up the steps. He looked deeply terrified. He just opened the door, led me into his study, and pointed at his computer monitor. Gary explained that he had an old backup camera hidden on the bookshelf in my new living room. He genuinely forgot to disconnect the feed when he moved out. He was clearing out his old digital accounts that morning when he saw a motion alert from my address at 2:00 in the morning. I sat down in the heavy leather chair, feeling a cold sweat break out on my forehead. Gary pressed play with a trembling finger. The video was in grainy black and white night vision, but the picture was clear. The front door of my house slowly opened. A figure stepped inside. He did not force the lock. He used a key. As the man turned his face toward the camera, my heart stopped. It was Derek, my perfect, charming, highly educated son-in-law, the man I trusted. I watched the screen in total, horrifying silence as Derek moved across my living room. He did not look around for valuables. He walked straight into the open kitchen area and headed directly for the marble counter. I leaned closer to the monitor, holding my breath. My daily pill organizer was sitting exactly where I had left it. It held the heart medication that kept me alive. Derek reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small plastic bag. I watched completely paralyzed as my son-in-law opened my pill organizer. He meticulously removed my prescribed daily medication from the Tuesday and Wednesday slots. Then, he opened his plastic bag and took out a handful of unknown white capsules. He carefully placed his strange white pills into my organizer, perfectly substituting them. When he finished his twisted task, he snapped the plastic lids shut. Then the camera caught something that will haunt my nightmares until the day I die. Derek smiled. It was a cold, calculated, dead smile. He turned around, walked out the front door, and locked it quietly behind him. Gary paused the video. The silence in the room felt like it was crushing my chest. I could not speak. I could not breathe. My mind raced back to last week. Just 7 days ago, I sat in a fancy lawyer's office and signed over 80% of my entire life work. My entire company shares directly to Derek. I did it because I thought my mind was starting to fail me. I had been feeling so tired, confused, and forgetful. Derek and my daughter convinced me it was time to step down. Looking at that frozen frame of Derek smiling in the dark, the horrifying truth hit me like a freight train. I was not losing my mind. I was not going crazy. My own son-in-law was poisoning me. He was slowly, methodically destroying my brain and my heart to steal my empire. I had just handed him everything on a silver platter. I sat in Gary's study and felt tears of profound betrayal burn my eyes. The sadness was quickly replaced by a cold, burning, and unforgiving rage. I am a Texas oil man. I do not lay down and die for anyone. For her. I thanked Gary, told him to delete the footage, and promised I would handle the situation. I walked out of that house a completely changed man. I drove back to my home knowing I was sharing my life with a predator. I knew I had to play the most dangerous game of my life. I had to go back to my house, look at that pillbox, and pretend I suspected absolutely nothing. The war had just begun, and I was going to make sure that I was the one who fired the final shot. The drive back to my house felt like a blur. My hands were still shaking, but my mind was operating with a cold and terrifying clarity. Every street corner and every stoplight in Austin seemed to mock me. I had built a life on being the smartest guy in the room. In the Texas oil business, you learn to read people. You learn to spot a liar a mile away. But I had let the biggest liar of all sleep in my own house, marry my only daughter, and take over the legacy I spent 40 years bleeding to build. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car for a long time. I looked at the front door, knowing the lock had been compromised by the very man who promised to protect this family. I took a deep breath, stepped out of the car, and walked inside. The house was exactly as I had left it. I walked straight to the kitchen counter. There it was, the pill organizer. The Tuesday and Wednesday compartments looked completely normal. Anyone else would just open the lid, swallow the pills, and die quietly in their sleep. I wanted to take a heavy hammer and smash the plastic into a million pieces. I wanted to call the police and drag him out of his office in handcuffs. But I knew better. The police would need undeniable proof of his intent. Derek could simply say he bought the wrong supplements by mistake. He could easily say I was just a confused old man who mixed up his own medication. I needed him to dig his own grave, and I needed to hand him the shovel. I picked up the phone and dialed my daughter's number. My voice was steady, betraying absolutely none of the absolute horror churning in my stomach. Rachel answered on the second ring, her voice bright and cheerful. I asked if she and Derek wanted to come over for a steak dinner. I told her I was feeling a bit lonely in the new house and wanted some company. She immediately agreed. She said Derek would be thrilled to grill the steaks exactly the way I liked them. I hung up the phone and stared at my reflection in the dark kitchen window. I had to put on the performance of a lifetime. A few hours later, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to see my beautiful daughter holding a bottle of red wine, and right behind her stood the man who was actively trying to murder me. Derek wore a crisp blue button-down shirt and his signature charming smile. He reached out and shook my hand firmly. He looked me right in the eyes, exuding warmth and profound respect. It took every ounce of physical willpower I possessed not to wrap my hands around his throat right then and there. Instead, I smiled back, patted him on the shoulder, and welcomed them inside my home. We sat out on the patio while Derek manned the grill. He was playing the role of the perfect son-in-law flawlessly. He asked about my new garden, poured my wine, and made Rachel laugh with stories from the office. Watching them together made my blood run cold. Rachel looked at him with such pure adoration. She was completely blind to the monster cooking our dinner. She was carrying his child, planning a future with a man who was methodically planning my funeral. During dinner, we sat around the large dining table. We talked about the weather and the local news. I waited for the perfect moment. I cut a piece of steak, chewed it slowly, and looked across the table directly at Derek. I kept my voice casual, almost apologetic. I said, "You know, Derek, the strangest thing happened last night. The security alarm in the living room gave a strange glitch. The motion sensor went off around 2 in the morning. Did you happen to swing by? I thought I might have forgotten to set the bypass." Derek did not even blink. He did not drop his fork. His heart rate probably did not even go up. He just offered a soft, deeply sympathetic smile and reached out to touch my arm across the table. He said, "Yes, Dad. I actually did come over. I am so sorry if the system woke you up. There have been several break-ins reported in this neighborhood over the past few weeks. I woke up worried about you knowing you have been forgetting to lock the doors lately. I just wanted to come by and double-check the deadbolts. I wanted to make sure you were safe." The lie was so smooth, so perfectly delivered, it was almost artistic. He used the exact vulnerability he had created to justify his presence in my house in the middle of the night. Rachel immediately chimed in, her face full of genuine concern. She placed her hand over mine. She told me that Derek had been up half the night worrying about my safety. She gently reminded me that my memory had been slipping recently, that I had been leaving my keys in the door and forgetting to turn off the stove. She looked at me with those deeply sad, pitying eyes. She truly believed her father was losing his mind. As I sat there listening to my daughter blindly defend the man who was poisoning me, a sickening realization washed over me. I felt all the air leave my lungs, the memory issues, the sudden brain fog, the heavy confusion that started exactly 1 month ago. It all clicked into place with horrifying precision. Just 1 week ago, I sat in that mahogany boardroom with my lawyers. I signed over 80% of my company's shares to Derek. I willingly gave up the massive empire I built from the ground up. I did it because Derek convinced me I was no longer mentally fit to run the logistics operation. I did it because I believed I was becoming a danger to the business and a burden to my family. He created the problem, and then he offered himself as the only logical solution. He poisoned me just enough to make me doubt my own sanity, pushed me to hand over the company, and now he was finishing the job. He was increasing the chemical dose to induce a fatal heart attack. I would die, and he would inherit everything, playing the grieving hero who took care of the sick old man until the bitter end. I looked at Derek. I saw the faint, arrogant glimmer of triumph in his eyes. He thought he had completely outsmarted me. He thought I was just a tired, broken old Texas oil man and ready to fade into the background. I nodded slowly and looked down at my plate, letting my shoulders slump in defeat. I thanked him for his concern. I told him I was so incredibly lucky to have a son-in-law who watched over me so carefully. I played the part of the frail, confused father to absolute perfection. But beneath the table, my fists were clenched so tight, my fingernails dug deep into my palms. I was not fading away. I was gathering my strength. When the front door finally clicked shut behind them, the silence in the house felt heavier than before. I stood by the window watching Derek open the car door for my daughter with that same sickeningly perfect smile. They drove off into the warm Texas night, leaving me alone with my thoughts and a house that no longer felt safe. I walked slowly back into the kitchen. The plates from our steak dinner were still sitting in the sink, a domestic scene that completely masked the deadly reality lurking just a few feet away. I turned my attention away from the dishes and focused entirely on the black marble counter. Sitting there under the soft glow of the under-cabinet lights was the automatic pill dispenser. It was a sleek, modern device featuring a digital clock and multiple compartments designed to pop open at specific times. I walked over and rested my hands on the cool marble, staring intently at the little plastic machine. A vivid memory washed over me, hitting me with the force of a physical blow. Exactly 1 month ago, Derek had walked into my old office carrying a brightly wrapped box. He had a look of deep concern on his face. He told me he had been doing some reading and wanted to help me stay organized. He unpacked the dispenser, set it up, and insisted on filling it for me every Sunday evening. He claimed it would take one more stressful task off my plate. He said he wanted me to focus on relaxing. I had thanked him. I had actually felt a surge of pride thinking how lucky my daughter was to marry a man who cared so deeply for his aging father-in-law. But looking back now, the timeline was terrifyingly precise. It was exactly 1 month ago that my mind began to slip. Prior to that day, my brain was as sharp as a tack. I could recite the quarterly earnings of every single well we operated in the Permian Basin from memory. But within a week of using that machine, the fog had rolled in. I started forgetting names. I misplaced my car keys. I found myself staring at spreadsheets, completely unable to make sense of the numbers. The fatigue was absolutely crushing. I thought it was just the inevitable decline of an old man. I thought my time had simply come. But it was not age. It was him. My hands trembled slightly as I reached out and picked up the dispenser. I popped open the compartments for the upcoming days. There they were, the little white capsules sitting innocently next to my actual blood pressure pills. They looked so generic, so utterly harmless. I went to the kitchen drawer, pulled out a small plastic sandwich bag, and carefully removed every single fake white pill from the dispenser. I dropped them into the bag, sealed it tight, and slipped it deep into the pocket of my trousers. I needed to keep them. They were my evidence. They were the key to putting a monster behind bars. But I also knew I had to maintain the illusion. If Derek came over and saw the dispenser completely empty, he would instantly know I was onto him. I had to outsmart him at his own game. I went into the guest bathroom, opened my leather travel shaving kit, and found my old prescription bottles. These were the backup medications I kept for emergencies, the ones Derek did not know about. I took my actual heart medication, swallowed it with a glass of cold water, and left the dispenser looking exactly as it should, minus the poison. The next 3 days were a brutal test of endurance. I had to let the toxic chemicals completely leave my system while pretending nothing had changed. Derek called me every single morning and every single night. He always asked if I had taken my medication. I lied with a cheerful voice, assuring him I had not missed a dose. On the first day without the poisoned pills, I felt a terrible withdrawal. My head pounded with a vicious migraine, and my hands shook so badly I could barely hold my coffee cup. I stayed inside, keeping the curtains drawn, sweating through my clothes, as my body fought to purge whatever nightmare cocktail he had been feeding me. By the second day, the headache began to recede, replaced by a profound exhaustion. But beneath the tiredness, something miraculous was happening. The thick, heavy fog that had enveloped my brain for 30 long days was starting to lift. I could remember where I placed my reading glasses. I could recall the exact conversations I had weeks ago. On the morning of the third clear day, I woke up long before the sun even rose. The empty house was completely quiet, and the air was cool. I sat up in bed, closed my eyes, and took a deep breath. For the first time in a month, my mind was crystal clear. The lethargy was entirely gone. The confusion had completely evaporated. I walked into the living room and watched the sunrise paint the Texas sky in brilliant shades of orange and red. I truly felt incredibly strong. I felt like the man who had built a massive oil empire from nothing. The dementia was nothing but a calculated chemical lie. Every single symptom, every moment of weakness, every instance of self-doubt had been artificially manufactured by the man who was currently sleeping next to my daughter. He had stolen my health to steal my legacy. But he had made one fatal miscalculation. He foolishly left me alive just long enough to easily figure it all out. I stood by the window watching the neighborhood wake up and felt a dangerous calm settle over me. The old ruthless Bill was finally back. My mind was sharp, my resolve was absolute, and I was completely ready to hunt him down. I dressed quickly that morning, choosing a simple gray suit. I needed to look presentable but completely unremarkable. I slipped the bag of fake capsules into my inside pocket. It felt heavy, like a loaded weapon against my chest. I left my phone on the counter. Derek could track my location through the app Rachel set up for my safety. I walked out to the garage, got into my vintage Ford truck, and started the engine. The familiar rumble of the old motor was a comforting sound. It reminded me of the days when I drove out to the dusty oil rigs long before I ever had a corner office or a treacherous son-in-law. I drove straight into downtown Austin. The city was bustling with morning traffic, tech workers rushing to their glass towers and college students drinking coffee. It felt surreal to be surrounded by normal life while carrying the evidence of my attempted murder. I parked near a discreet, high-end private toxicology lab. I had found the place through an old friend who used to run background checks for my company. This lab catered to wealthy clients who needed absolute confidentiality. No insurance claims, no electronic health records, just cash and extreme discretion. I walked into the sleek, quiet reception area and asked for Dr. Bennett. He was a brilliant toxicologist who spent 20 years consulting for the state crime lab. When I entered his office, he looked at me over his silver glasses. I did not give him my real name. I placed the plastic bag of capsules on his mahogany desk, along with a thick envelope containing $2,000. I needed a comprehensive chemical breakdown of those pills by the end of the day. I needed to know exactly what they were and what they would do to an elderly man with a minor heart condition. He took the envelope, examined the pills under his desk lamp, and told me to come back at 4 in the afternoon. The hours of waiting were sheer torture. I spent the time walking around Lady Bird Lake. I watched the water ripple in the wind and thought about Rachel. I remembered the day she was born, looking tiny in the hospital nursery. I remembered walking her down the aisle, placing her hand in Derek's, believing I was giving her to a man who would protect her. The betrayal cut deep. He was using her love for me as a weapon. He was using my legacy to build his own twisted empire. I realized that if I died, Rachel would be left completely alone with a sociopath. I could not let it happen. At exactly 4:00, I walked back into the private clinic. Dr. Bennett was waiting for me. He did not look like a man who just ran a routine test. He looked deeply disturbed. He motioned for me to sit down and closed the heavy oak door behind me. He placed a printed report on the desk, but he did not slide it over immediately. He folded his hands and looked me dead in the eye. He asked me where I got those pills. I told him that was not part of our arrangement. He sighed heavily and leaned back in his chair. He explained that the capsules were completely custom-made. Someone had purchased empty gel casings and filled them by hand. The powder inside was a highly concentrated, incredibly dangerous cocktail of two distinct chemical families. The first component was a heavy old generation antipsychotic drug. It is the kind of medication used in psychiatric wards to completely sedate violent patients. When given to an unprescribed healthy person, it causes extreme lethargy, severe confusion, and a complete inability to process complex thoughts. The second component was even worse. It was a synthetic hallucinogen dosed just high enough to cause paranoia, visual distortions, and memory blackouts. Dr. Bennett tapped his pen against the desk. He told me that if someone had been taking this cocktail daily for a month, their symptoms would perfectly mimic rapid-onset Alzheimer's disease or profound dementia. They would lose their grip on reality. Their loved ones would assume their brain was simply deteriorating. The doctor paused, taking a slow breath. He then pointed to the specific dosages I had brought him in the bag. He said the pills from the Tuesday and Wednesday slots were packed with a triple dose of the stimulant compound. I asked him what that meant. I needed to hear the exact clinical reality of what Derek had planned for me. Dr. Bennett looked grim. He explained that a sudden massive spike of those specific chemicals in a 79-year-old body would cause an immediate violent spike in blood pressure. The heart would race uncontrollably, demanding more oxygen than the arteries could provide. It would trigger a massive myocardial infarction, a fatal heart attack. It would be entirely untraceable during a standard autopsy, especially since everyone already expected an old sick man to pass away quietly in his sleep. The words hung in the air, cold and clinical. Derek was not just stealing my money. He was not just gaslighting me into early retirement. He was actively, deliberately executing me. The pills in that box were a carefully timed death sentence. He wanted me to die this week and right after he secured the company shares. I thanked Dr. Bennett, took the printed report, and walked out into the blinding Texas afternoon sun. The heat felt good on my face. The sadness was completely gone now. There was no room for grief. There was only a cold, methodical desire for total annihilation. I held the medical report tightly in my hand. It was the first piece of undeniable proof, but I knew it was not enough to put him away forever. I needed to expose his entire rotting soul to the world. I needed to hunt him down in the shadows. To hunt a predator, you must convince him that you are nothing more than helpless prey. I drove back to my neighborhood, formulated a plan, and decided it was time to put on the performance of a lifetime. Derek needed to believe that his toxic cocktail was working perfectly. He needed to believe that my mind was completely shattered beyond repair. The next afternoon, I drove my truck to the local grocery store just a few miles down the road. It was a busy supermarket heavily filled with young families and busy shoppers. I walked inside, grabbed a metal shopping cart, and began wandering aimlessly down the bright, noisy aisles. I picked up totally random items: a large box of cereal, a can of soup, a jar of pickles, and carelessly threw them into the cart without even looking at the prices. Then I simply stopped moving right in the middle of the fresh produce section. I let go of the cart handle. I widened my eyes, let my jaw drop slightly, and began to deliberately hyperventilate. I spun around in a slow circle, looking absolutely terrified of my surroundings. A young employee wearing a red apron approached me cautiously, asking if I needed help finding something. I grabbed his arm tightly, making my hands tremble violently. I looked at him with sheer panic and told him I did not know where I was. I told him I could not remember my own name or how I got safely there. The young man looked deeply alarmed by my sudden outburst. He gently guided me away from the crowd to the front of the store and nervously called for the manager over the loudspeaker. They sat me down in a quiet, windowless office near the customer service desk and kindly offered me a bottle of water. I continued to flawlessly play the tragic part, staring blankly at the beige wall, occasionally muttering disjointed nonsense about an old oil rig that had been shut down 20 years ago. The manager carefully searched my wallet, found my emergency contact card tucked behind my driving license, and immediately dialed Rachel. I sat in that stiff chair for 45 minutes, perfectly maintaining the painful facade of a completely broken, senile old man. Finally, the heavy office door burst open. Rachel rushed in frantically, her face entirely streaked with fresh tears. She threw her arms tightly around my neck and sobbed loudly into my shoulder. I patted her back weakly, pretending I only half recognized my own daughter. Right behind her stood Derek. He wore a perfectly tailored dark suit, looking every bit the successful executive he had ruthlessly stolen from me. He placed a heavy, comforting hand on Rachel's shaking shoulder and looked down at me with an expression of expertly manufactured pity. But I could clearly see the subtle, arrogant tightness around his mouth. He was desperately trying to hide a cruel smirk. He truly believed his toxic poison was destroying my brain exactly right on schedule. He shook hands and thanked the store manager profusely, slipping seamlessly into the heroic role of the responsible family caretaker. They led me out into the blinding Texas heat and helped me into the back seat of Derek's expensive black sport utility vehicle. I slumped against the leather seat, letting my head loll to the side. I closed my eyes halfway, pretending to drift into a state of semi-consciousness. Rachel sat in the front passenger seat, blowing her nose into a tissue. Derek started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot. The ride home began in heavy silence, broken only by Rachel's occasional sniffles. Then Derek made his move. He kept his voice low, soft, and dripping with fake empathy. He told Rachel that they needed to have a very difficult conversation. He said that what happened today at the grocery store was a massive wake-up call. He pointed out I could have wandered into traffic, or someone could take advantage of my confusion. Rachel agreed tearfully, saying she felt terribly guilty for not checking on me earlier that morning. Derek reached over and took her hand. He smoothly transitioned the conversation from my physical safety to my financial security. He reminded her that I still held 20% of the company shares and controlled 2 massive family trust funds. He argued that if my mental state was deteriorating this rapidly, those assets were highly vulnerable. He suggested that someone could easily trick me into signing away my life savings. He completely ignored the absolute fact that he was the only one actively doing exactly that. He pressed further, his voice a masterclass in dark manipulation. He told Rachel it was absolutely critical that they secure full medical and financial power of attorney immediately. He framed it as an act of profound love and necessary protection. He said they needed legal authority to make decisions on my behalf before the state stepped in or before I did something completely irreversible. Rachel hesitated, wiping her eyes. She said it felt so final, like she was officially giving up on her father. Derek tightened his grip on her hand. He whispered that it was the only way to keep my legacy safe for their unborn child. He promised he would handle all the legal paperwork so she would not have to bear the emotional burden. I sat in the back, silently listening to every single word. My heart beat a steady, slow rhythm. I stared blankly at the back of his headrest, projecting total emptiness, while my mind recorded his entire strategy. He wanted the absolute final piece of the puzzle. He wanted the power to sign my name, drain my accounts, and legally control my medical care when he finally induced my fatal heart attack. He thought I was nothing but an empty shell in the back seat. He did not realize he had just handed me his entire evil playbook for the ultimate victory. When Derek pulled into my driveway, he put the vehicle in park and turned to look at me. I maintained my vacant stare, letting my chin rest against my chest. Rachel helped me out of the car, her hands full of misplaced guilt. They walked me inside, settled me into my old armchair, and covered my legs with a blanket. Derek poured me cold water, placing it on the table with a look of deeply profound satisfaction. They stayed for 20 minutes, speaking in hushed tones about scheduling a meeting with the family lawyers. I simply nodded whenever Rachel touched my arm, playing the fading patriarch to the bitter end. When the front door closed and his engine faded down the street, I threw the blanket off my legs. I stood up, walked into the kitchen, and poured the water down the sink. I did not trust a single thing that man touched. The performance was over for the day, and it was time to bring in the heavy artillery. I pulled my old leather-bound address book from the heavy desk. I bypassed my smartphone completely, knowing Derek could easily monitor my call logs. Instead, I drove down to a quiet strip mall on the edge of town and used a public payphone that still miraculously functioned. I dialed a number I had not called in nearly 7 years. The phone rang 3 times before a deep voice answered. It was Victor Lawson. Victor was a 60-year-old former Federal Bureau of Investigation agent who specialized in deep-cover corporate espionage. When he retired from the Bureau, he started a private intelligence firm catering to the Texas oil elite. We worked together years ago when rivals tried sabotaging my drilling operations. Victor was not just a private investigator. He was a ghost, a man who lived in the shadows and dismantled threats with terrifying efficiency. I told him I needed his immediate assistance and that my life was in active danger. He did not ask any questions. He simply gave me a time and hung up the phone. Later that evening, when the neighborhood went dark, the side gate of my backyard opened silently. Victor stepped onto the patio. He wore dark clothing and carried a heavy black equipment case. Despite his age, he moved with the silent, fluid grace of a seasoned predator. His gray hair was a military fade, and his eyes scanned the perimeter with practiced paranoia. I unlocked the sliding glass door and let him inside. We skipped pleasantries and handshakes. I led him straight into the kitchen, pulled the blinds shut, and handed him the toxicology report. I watched his eyes dart across the pages. For a long moment, the only sound was the refrigerator. Victor set the paper down and looked up at me. His expression was unreadable, a cold, professional mask. He told me Derek was acting like a professional executioner. Victor unlatched his case, revealing sophisticated electronic equipment. Before launching an offensive attack, we needed to ensure the battlefield was secure. He pulled out a handheld radio frequency detector to locate any hidden cameras Derek planted. Victor began a slow, methodical sweep of my entire house. He walked through the living room, waving the wand over the lampshades behind the television and underneath the coffee table. I followed him silently as he inspected the dining room, the guest bathroom, and my master bedroom. He checked the electrical outlets, the ceiling fans, and the smoke detectors. After 40 long minutes of silence, he clicked the device off and nodded. The house was clean. Derek was arrogant. He believed the poisoned pills and my fake dementia were enough to secure his victory. He did not feel the need to bug the house, believing my brain was rotting away. That arrogance was his greatest weakness, and we were going to exploit it ruthlessly. With the house secure, we built our invisible web. Victor pulled out several tiny military-grade cameras, no larger than a matchstick, designed to operate in total darkness, using advanced infrared sensors. He climbed a stepladder and carefully removed the grated covers from the air conditioning vents in the ceiling. He planted the micro cameras deep inside the ductwork, angling them perfectly to capture the kitchen counter, the front entryway, and the living room sofa. Next, he installed audio recorders behind light switch plates. These microphones were sensitive enough to pick up a whisper from across the room. He routed all the encrypted data to a secure cellular router hidden inside a hollowed-out book on my library shelf. This router would transmit the live audio and video feeds directly to Victor's encrypted servers. If Derek stepped foot in this house again, every breath he took, every lie he told, and every pill he touched, it would be recorded in stunning high definition. What would you do in this situation? Confront the enemy directly or build a trap? Tell me in the comments where you all are watching from today, please. Victor wiped the counter, leaving no fingerprints. We stood in the dark, silent kitchen, moonlight bleeding through the drawn blinds. Victor lowered his voice to a rough whisper. Catching Derek tampering with medication was only half the battle. We needed to understand his exact endgame. The pills were the weapon, but we needed to find the motive. He promised to dig into Derek's financial history and his daily movements. We needed to know exactly what he was doing with my company and why he was desperate to execute me this week. I thanked Victor, feeling hope for the first time since this nightmare began. He slipped out the back door, vanishing into the Texas night, as quietly as he arrived. I stood alone, entirely surrounded by hidden cameras and microphones. The house felt different now. It was no longer a cage where an old man was waiting to die. It was a hunting blind, and I was holding the rifle. The next morning, I woke up before the sun even peeked over the Texas horizon. I brewed a pot of strong black coffee and sat at the kitchen island, staring at the little black dot hidden in the air conditioning vent above my refrigerator. It was a comforting reminder that I was no longer fighting this war blindly. Around 8 o'clock, my phone rang. It was Derek. He asked how I was feeling after yesterday's episode at the grocery store. I made my voice sound raspy and weak. I told him I was very tired and confused, that I had a hard time remembering what happened. He sounded deeply pleased. He reminded me to take my morning medication, acting like a devoted son-in-law. I promised him I would hung up the phone and dumped his poison directly into my plastic evidence bag. At noon, my secure burner phone buzzed. It was a text message from Victor containing an address for a warehouse district on the east side of Austin and a time. I grabbed my keys, made sure I wasn't being followed, and drove to the location. It was an unassuming corrugated metal building that looked like a defunct auto repair shop from the outside. Inside it was a state-of-the-art surveillance hub. Victor was sitting behind a massive desk covered with multiple glowing computer monitors. The screens were filled with cascading rows of data banking ledgers and corporate tax filings. He did not look up when I walked in. He just pointed to an empty metal chair beside him. I sat down, my eyes scanning the complex spreadsheets. I asked him if he found anything. Victor took a slow sip from his coffee mug and turned his chair to face me. He told me that Derek had been incredibly busy since the moment I signed over the 80% controlling interest in my company. Victor explained that Derek had immediately locked out my old accountants and hired a new financial firm based out of Chicago. But Victor was a former federal agent with deep connections and an unparalleled talent for breaking through digital firewalls. He had spent the entire night quietly hacking into their secure servers, pulling every single transaction Derek had authorized over the past 7 days. Victor tapped a key on his keyboard, and a specific document expanded on the large center monitor. It was a commercial loan agreement. I leaned in, putting on my reading glasses. As my eyes moved down the dense legal text, my blood began to boil all over again. Derek had used his newly acquired 80% ownership stake in my logistics company as direct collateral to secure a massive corporate loan. He had essentially mortgaged the entire fleet of trucks, the warehouses, and the drilling contracts I had spent 40 years building from the dirt up. I looked at the principal amount at the bottom of the page. It was for $15 million. I felt a sharp pain in my chest, a genuine pang of grief for the empire I had built. $15 million was enough debt to completely bankrupt the logistics firm within a year if the market took a slight downturn. Derek was bleeding my life work dry. He was intentionally destroying the financial security I had promised to leave for Rachel and my unborn grandchild. I asked Victor where the money went, hoping it was at least sitting in an escrow account or a corporate reserve. Victor shook his head grimly. He clicked another folder, pulling up a series of international wire transfer receipts. He explained that the money never even touched our local Texas bank accounts, the moment the $15 million loan was fully approved and funded. Derek authorized an immediate transfer. The funds were instantly bounced through 3 different intermediate financial institutions in Delaware and Nevada to mask the digital trail. But Victor followed the money. He tracked the final destination. The entire $15 million had been wired to a private offshore account held by a newly formed shell company. The company was registered in the Cayman Islands, completely outside the jurisdiction of United States financial regulators. I sat back in the metal chair, rubbing my temples. The sheer scale of his betrayal was staggering. This was not a simple case of a greedy relative skimming a few $1,000s from a retirement fund. This was a highly sophisticated, meticulously planned corporate heist. Derek had engineered the perfect crime. He poisoned me to force a medical retirement, took control of my assets, mortgaged them for hard cash, and hid the money on a tropical island where nobody could legally touch it. Once I died from his toxic pill cocktail, he would be the grieving heir. The company would collapse under the massive loan, but he would not care. He would already have his $15 million safely tucked away. Victor watched my face, giving me a moment to process the devastating reality. Then he leaned forward and pointed a thick finger at the shell company registration document on the screen. He told me that setting up a Cayman account with that level of extreme privacy required a specific corporate structure. Usually criminals use fake names or anonymous proxy directors. But Derek was arrogant. He wanted absolute control over the money when he finally made his escape. Victor told me he had dug into the incorporation papers of the offshore entity. He found a secondary signature, a named beneficiary, who had full access to the $15 million. I looked at Victor, my jaw tightening. I assumed the secondary name belonged to a corrupt lawyer or a shady business partner Derek kept hidden. But his expression told me it was something far more personal. He told me the shell company was not solely in his control. It was co-owned by a young woman. My mind raced. I desperately needed to know her true identity. Who was she? Who was she? Victor typed a rapid sequence of commands into his keyboard, bringing up a secure background check database. A high-resolution photograph appeared on the large monitor. It showed a young, strikingly beautiful woman with long dark hair and a bright smile. Victor read the file aloud. Her name was Maya. She was 28 years old. According to the federal tax records, she had not held a legitimate job in over 5 years. Yet she was listed as the primary co-signer and beneficiary of a $15 million offshore bank account in the Cayman Islands. I stared at her face, trying to find any spark of recognition. I had never seen this woman before in my life. I asked Victor how Derek could possibly be connected to a woman who had no ties to our industry or our city. Victor did not answer immediately. He opened another folder containing property records and lease agreements. He pulled up a luxury real estate listing for a massive multi-million-dollar penthouse condominium located in the most expensive district of downtown Dallas. It was a stunning property with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. Victor pointed to the signature on the long-term lease agreement. It was Derek's signature. He had been renting this luxury penthouse for the past 5 years. He was paying over $12,000 a month in rent, all funneled through a discreet corporate expense account that he had carefully hidden from my old accountants. 5 years. My mind violently calculated the timeline. Rachel and Derek had been married for exactly 10 years. That meant for the last 5 years, half of their entire marriage, he had been maintaining a completely separate life 3 hours away in Dallas. He told Rachel he was traveling for business. He told her he was visiting remote drilling sites or negotiating with international suppliers. Every time he packed his overnight bag and kissed my daughter goodbye, he was actually driving straight to Dallas to be with Maya. He was spending my money to drape his mistress in luxury while smiling in my daughter's face. But the financial betrayal was only the beginning. Victor warned me to brace myself before he clicked on the next file. He said that what he was about to show me would change absolutely everything forever. Victor brought up a series of surveillance photographs taken by a private investigator he had contracted in Dallas just a few hours ago. The first picture showed Maya walking out of the lobby of the luxury condominium building. She was carrying expensive shopping bags. The second photograph showed her walking into a private, highly exclusive preschool. The third photograph made the air completely vanish from my lungs. It was a picture of Maya walking out of the school holding the hand of a little boy. He looked to be about 3 or 4 years old. He was laughing. Then came the final photograph. It was taken at a park near the penthouse. It showed Maya sitting on a picnic blanket. Beside her was Derek. He was wearing casual clothes I had never seen him wear. He was holding the little boy in his arms, tossing him up into the air, and smiling with a look of pure, unadulterated joy. It was the look of a proud, devoted father. Derek had a secret child. He had an entire second family hidden away in a different city. He had been raising a son with his young mistress. The sheer evil of his master plan finally materialized in front of me with terrifying clarity. Derek was not just stealing my money to run away with a random woman. He was systematically draining my entire family legacy to permanently fund his actual family. He viewed Rachel and me as nothing more than an ATM. He married into my family, secured his position within my logistics empire, and patiently waited for the right moment to strike. He needed me dead and the company mortgaged so he could take his $15 million and disappear into the sunset with Maya. I thought about Rachel. She was currently at home decorating a nursery, heavily pregnant with their second child. She was completely oblivious to the fact that her husband was a sociopathic phantom. She believed she had a perfect marriage. If Derek succeeded in giving me a fatal heart attack, he would inherit everything. Let the Texas company fall into massive bankruptcy and walk away with the untraceable offshore millions. He would likely file for a sudden divorce, leaving my pregnant daughter financially ruined, emotionally devastated, and completely alone while he lived like a king on a tropical island. I felt a physical sickness twist in my gut, followed instantly by a wave of cold, consuming fury. I had spent 40 years protecting my family from the wolves of the business world, only to invite the most dangerous predator directly into my living room. I looked at Victor. He was watching me silently, knowing that the man sitting in front of him was no longer just a betrayed father. I was a man who had absolutely nothing left to lose and everything to avenge. I asked Victor what our next immediate move needed to be right now. Victor closed the file on the computer screen. The image of Derek's secret family vanished into the digital darkness. Victor leaned forward and folded his hands on the desk. He told me that we had the motive, we had the financial records, and we had the poison. But we still needed the definitive proof of his murderous intent. We needed to catch him physically preparing to execute the final stage of his plan. We needed to put the rope around his neck and let him confidently pull the lever himself. It was time to enter the absolute endgame. I stood up from the chair. The weakness I had been faking was completely gone. I walked out ready. I walked out ready to execute the next critical phase of our counterattack. Victor handed me a small, unassuming silver flash drive before I left his warehouse. He told me it contained a highly aggressive custom-written extraction program. If I could manage to plug it directly into Derek's personal laptop for just 3 minutes, it would completely clone his entire hard drive. It would capture his encrypted emails, his hidden browser history, and every single digital footprint he thought he had successfully erased. The only problem was that Derek kept his home office deadbolted at all times, treating it like a high-security vault within his own house. But I knew that a perfect opportunity was rapidly approaching. That upcoming Sunday afternoon, Rachel had invited me over for a large family barbecue to celebrate the end of the summer season. When Sunday arrived, I drove up to their beautiful suburban house. The manicured green lawns and the sound of children playing in the neighborhood felt like a twisted joke compared to the dark reality I now knew. I parked my truck and walked through the side gate into the backyard. The smell of grilled meat and sweet barbecue sauce filled the warm air. Rachel was standing by the large outdoor kitchen, carefully flipping burgers and smiling brightly. She looked incredibly happy, her pregnant belly showing clearly beneath her floral summer dress. Derek was standing near the patio holding a cold beer and chatting loudly with a neighbor across the fence. He played the part of the ultimate American family man with sickening perfection. I greeted them both, making sure to keep my hands trembling slightly and my eyes looking mildly confused. Derek gave me a patronizing pat on the back and pointed me toward a comfortable, shaded chair. But I did not intend to sit down. My 5-year-old grandson Leo came running across the grass and crashed into my legs. He begged me to play hide-and-seek with him. This was exactly the opening I needed. I smiled down at the little boy and told him I knew the absolute best hiding spots in the entire house. Rachel called out from the grill, telling me not to tire myself out too much. I waved her off, playing the role of the doting grandfather. Leo and I went inside the cool air-conditioned house. I counted to 10 loudly in the living room while he scrambled to hide behind the large living room curtains. I found him quickly, making him giggle uncontrollably. Then I told him it was my turn to hide. I instructed him to stand by the front door, cover his eyes tightly, and slowly count all the way to 50. The moment he started counting, my entire demeanor shifted. I dropped the frail old man act and moved with the silent, deliberate speed of a hunter. I walked rapidly down the carpeted hallway toward Derek's locked home office. I knew Derek kept the spare brass key to that room, hidden inside a fake, hollowed-out book. On the hallway shelf, a secret Rachel had innocently mentioned to me months ago. I reached into the book, felt the cold metal of the key, and slipped it quietly into the heavy lock. The door clicked open with a soft thud. I stepped inside and pulled the door almost completely shut behind me, leaving just a tiny crack to listen for approaching footsteps. The office was dark, sterile, and meticulously organized. It looked exactly like the mind of a sociopath. I moved straight to the large mahogany desk. His sleek silver laptop was sitting perfectly in the center, closed and asleep. I pulled the small flash drive from my pocket and pushed it firmly into the side port. Victor had told me that I did not even need the password. The specialized program was designed to bypass the login screen and immediately begin copying data the second it received power. The laptop screen flickered to life, displaying a harsh black background with a small, rapidly loading green progress bar. The timer on the screen indicated it would take exactly 3 minutes. 3 minutes is an absolute eternity when you are standing inside the lion's den. I stood perfectly still, my eyes locked on the glowing green bar. 10%. 20%. My heart was pounding so hard against my ribs, I thought it might echo through the silent house. 30%. From down the hallway, I heard Leo's small voice yell out that he had finished counting. He started running through the house, opening closet doors and looking under beds. 40%. 50%. The machine hummed softly. Then the sound that made my blood run cold echoed from the backyard. I heard the sliding glass door open and close. Derek's heavy footsteps stepped onto the hardwood floor of the living room. He called out to Rachel, asking where I had gone. Rachel yelled back from outside that I was playing hide-and-seek with Leo. 60%. 70%. I heard Derek walk toward the hallway. His leather shoes tapped rhythmically against the floorboards. He was getting closer. He called my name, his voice dripping with that fake, syrupy sweetness. 80%. I held my breath, flattening myself against the side of the heavy desk to stay completely out of the line of sight from the door crack. 90%. Derek's footsteps paused right outside the hallway closet just 10 feet away from the office door. I could hear him breathing. I could hear him asking Leo if he had checked the guest bedroom yet. 95%. Come on, I prayed. 99%. A beep echoed. 100%. The screen went black. I yanked the drive out of the port, shoved it into my pocket, closed the laptop, and slipped out the door successfully, planting the ultimate Trojan horse right under his arrogant nose, completely undetected and fully prepared for our final victory. I stepped out of the hallway and moved swiftly toward the kitchen just as Derek rounded the corner. He stopped, looking at me with a slight frown. I instantly slumped my shoulders, letting my hands shake as I leaned heavily against the kitchen island. I told him I was dizzy and was looking for a glass of water. The suspicion in his eyes melted away, replaced by that familiar, sickeningly fake concern. He poured me a glass of ice water and gently guided me back to the patio. Rachel looked deeply worried when she saw me leaning heavily on his arm. I played the part of the exhausted old man, perfectly apologizing for ruining the barbecue. I told them I just needed to go home and rest in my own bed. Derek eagerly offered to drive me, but I insisted I was fine to take my truck, as long as I drove slowly. He walked me to my vehicle, playing the devoted son-in-law right to the very end. The moment my truck turned the corner, my posture straightened. I reached into my pocket and gripped the small silver flash drive. It felt incredibly heavy, loaded with the digital secrets of a man who wanted me dead. I drove straight back to the East Austin warehouse district. Victor was waiting for me. He had a fresh pot of coffee brewing, and his computer screens were glowing in the dim light of the metal building. I tossed the flash drive onto his large desk. He did not say a word. He plugged it into an isolated terminal and began his work. I sat in the metal chair, watching his fingers fly across the keyboard. He explained that Derek used military-grade encryption on his personal files, but the extraction program had captured the raw security keys while the laptop was running. It took Victor less than 45 minutes to completely crack the digital vault open. Suddenly, thousands of hidden files, private emails, offshore bank statements, and encrypted chat logs flooded the massive monitors. We finally had the raw data to destroy his entire life. Victor began sorting through the documents, looking for the final piece of the puzzle. He navigated through a folder cleverly disguised as generic software updates. Inside, he found a massive PDF document that had been digitally signed just 2 weeks ago. Victor opened the file, his eyes scanning the dense legal text. He leaned back in his chair and let out a low whistle. It was a comprehensive life insurance policy. But it was not a standard policy. It was an expedited high-risk corporate executive policy taken out on my life. The total payout amount was a staggering $5 million. I stared at the screen, my mind struggling to process the sheer audacity of his plan. Derek had somehow managed to forge my medical records, submitting clean health reports from a corrupt private clinic, to bypass the mandatory physical examination required for a man my age. He had paid the massive premium upfront in cash, funneling the money from the company accounts he now controlled. The policy included a specific clause that guaranteed an immediate payout in the event of a sudden fatal cardiac event. It was the exact method of death he was carefully orchestrating with those toxic white capsules. He was ensuring the very murder he was committing. It was a flawless, incredibly lucrative trap. But as Victor scrolled down to the final page of the insurance contract, the puzzle pieces suddenly stopped fitting together. Victor highlighted the beneficiary section of the document. I leaned closer to the monitor, expecting to see Derek's name, or perhaps the name of his offshore shell company in the Cayman Islands. Instead, I saw a name that made no sense at all. The sole beneficiary of the $5 million life insurance policy was my daughter Rachel. I sat back, bewildered. A deep, confusing silence filled the warehouse. I looked at Victor, searching for an explanation. Why would Derek risk absolutely everything, including a potential murder charge, to poison me just to hand $5 million directly to Rachel? If I died, the money would go into a secure trust account solely controlled by her. Under Texas law, inheritances and specific life insurance payouts are generally considered separate property. If his ultimate goal was to take the offshore millions and abandon my pregnant daughter to start a new life with his secret mistress in Dallas, giving Rachel a massive financial safety net, directly contradicted his entire greedy motive. I paced across the concrete floor of the warehouse, my mind racing through different scenarios. Was he feeling guilty? Was this some twisted way of providing for his children before he vanished? No. Derek was a pure sociopath. Sociopaths do not leave $5 million on the table out of the goodness of their hearts. Every single move he made was coldly calculated to benefit himself and his secret second family. There was a missing link. There was a darker layer to his master plan that we had not yet uncovered. He needed that $5 million, but he structured the legal paperwork so that the money would land precisely in Rachel's lap the moment my heart stopped beating. Why? Victor remained silent, his eyes locked on the glowing screen. He minimized the insurance document and opened a folder containing audio files. These were the encrypted recordings of Derek's internet phone calls. Victor told me the answer to our question was probably hidden inside these conversations. He clicked on an audio file dated just 3 days ago. It was a recorded call between Derek and his mistress Maya. As the audio began to play through the warehouse speakers, I stood perfectly still. The voice of my son-in-law filled the room, and the horrifying truth of his ultimate endgame finally revealed itself, exposing a level of cruelty so profound it made my blood run ice cold. The audio file clicked and hummed as the recording began. I could hear the distinct, heavy sound of tires rolling over the asphalt. Victor explained that he had managed to slip a microscopic listening device under the dashboard of Derek's vehicle while it was parked outside the family barbecue. The muffled sound of the car engine filled the quiet warehouse. Then the rhythmic ringing of an outgoing phone call echoed through the speakers. A woman answered on the second ring. Her voice was sharp, youthful, and laced with thick impatience. It was Maya. She did not bother with a greeting. She immediately asked Derek how much longer they had to wait. She complained that she was tired of hiding in Dallas and that their son was asking why his father was never around on the weekends. Derek spoke in a low, soothing tone, the exact same tone he used when he was pretending to care for me. He told her to be patient. He said the old man was deteriorating perfectly on schedule. He bragged about my pathetic performance at the grocery store, laughing as he described how weak and broken I looked. Hearing him mock my pain was infuriating, but it was nothing compared to what came next. Maya sighed loudly through the phone. She asked about the money. She said $15 million in the offshore account was a great start, but she wanted to know about the life insurance policy he had promised her. She asked why he went through the trouble of forging medical records just to list Rachel as the primary beneficiary. Maya sounded genuinely angry, accusing Derek of secretly wanting to take care of his legal wife. Derek's laughter filled the car. It was a cold, metallic sound that sent shivers down my spine. He told Maya she was being completely paranoid and foolish. He said he did not care about Rachel at all. He explained that making Rachel the beneficiary was the absolute masterpiece of his entire operation. He told Maya to listen closely because he was about to explain how they were going to get every single penny without raising a single red flag from the federal investigators. I leaned forward in the metal chair, my hands gripping my knees. Derek carefully explained the legal mechanics of the $5 million policy. He said that if I simply died of a heart attack, the insurance company might delay the payout or demand an autopsy because the policy was so new. But if the death was ruled a homicide, the insurance company would be forced to immediately freeze the funds pending a criminal investigation. Maya interrupted, sounding panicked. She asked why he would ever want the police involved in a murder he was committing. Derek told her to calm down and let him finish. He explained that the police would never look at him. They would look directly at the person who spent the most time caring for the sick, confused old man. They would look at the daughter, who was visibly exhausted, heavily pregnant, and completely overwhelmed by caregiver burnout. They would look at Rachel. My breath caught in my throat. Victor stopped typing and stared at the speakers. Derek continued detailing his monstrous plan. He told Maya that on the night he finally gives me the lethal dose, he will wait until my heart stops beating completely. Before he calls the paramedics, he is going to take the remaining stash of the toxic, unprescribed white capsules. He is going to walk into Rachel's bedroom while she is sleeping and hide those pills deep inside her purse and inside her bedside drawer. Once the ambulance takes my body away, Derek will make an anonymous phone call to the police from a burner phone. He will suggest they run a full toxicology screen on my blood and search the house for unprescribed sedatives. The police will inevitably find the hidden pills in Rachel's personal belongings. The narrative will write itself perfectly for the detectives. A stressed, exhausted daughter pushed to the brink by her father's severe dementia decided to quietly euthanize him to end their mutual suffering. Maya gasped softly on the recording. Derek sounded incredibly proud of his own twisted brilliance. He explained the legal fallout with terrifying precision. He said that under the Slayer statute in the state of Texas, a person cannot legally inherit money or receive life insurance benefits from someone they murdered. The moment Rachel is officially arrested and charged with my murder, the $5 million policy will instantly default to her legal spouse. That spouse is Derek. He gets the $5 million cleanly and legally. Furthermore, because Rachel will be facing decades in a federal prison, Derek will immediately be granted full, sole legal custody of their children. The courts will give him complete unchecked control over the family trust funds meant for my grandchildren. He told Maya that once Rachel is locked away, he will simply file for divorce, sell the Texas house, and move to the Cayman Islands with her and their son. He promised Maya that they would have absolute freedom, endless wealth, and zero loose ends to worry about. The audio recording ended with Derek promising Maya that it would all be over by the end of the week. The warehouse fell into a deafening silence. The cruelty of his plan was so immense, so completely devoid of any basic human empathy, that my mind physically rejected it for a few seconds. He was not just planning to stop my heart. He was planning to frame his own pregnant wife for patricide. He was willing to send the mother of his children to a concrete prison cell for the rest of her natural life, just to secure an insurance payout. He was going to destroy Rachel's life, steal my grandchildren, and walk away looking like a tragic, grieving hero. I buried my face in my hands. The tears that fell were not tears of sorrow or fear. They were tears of pure, unadulterated rage. I had spent my entire life building a fortress to keep my family safe from the cruelties of the outside world. I had worked until my hands bled so Rachel would never know pain or suffering. And now the man sleeping in her bed was methodically building a gallows for her. He was using my death as the rope to hang her with. Victor slowly reached over and turned off the speakers. He looked at me with a grim understanding. He knew that the stakes had just escalated from corporate fraud and attempted murder to the total annihilation of my entire bloodline. We could no longer just expose him. We had to completely obliterate him. I wiped my face, stood up from the metal chair, and looked directly at the glowing monitors. I told Victor that the time for playing defense was absolutely over. We were going to destroy him. Victor nodded slowly, his face hardened into a mask of pure determination. We sat back down at the heavy desk, the gravity of the situation settling over us like a suffocating blanket. I could still hear the faint lingering echoes of Derek's cruel laughter in my mind. He was not merely a greedy man looking for a quick payout. He was a highly organized psychopath, capable of destroying a pregnant woman, his own wife, to secure his financial freedom. I thought about my daughter Rachel sleeping peacefully in her home, completely unaware that her husband was meticulously measuring the dimensions of her prison cell. I thought about my young grandson Leo, who had just spent the afternoon playing hide-and-seek with me, blissfully ignorant that his father planned to rip him away from his mother forever. The sheer, unadulterated evil of the frame-up was almost impossible to fully comprehend. Derek had weaponized my illness to kill me, and he planned to weaponize my death to bury my daughter. If his plan succeeded, Rachel would wake up one morning to find the police at her door, holding a warrant and a bag of illegal sedatives found deep in her own purse. She would be charged with homicide, stripped of her children, and thrown into a federal penitentiary, all while grieving the sudden loss of her father. The depth of that betrayal made my chest physically ache, but it also fueled a fire inside me that burned hotter than any oil rig I had ever seen. I looked at Victor and asked him exactly what we needed to do to guarantee that Derek would spend the rest of his natural life behind steel bars. I did not just want him arrested for wire fraud or corporate embezzlement. Those white-collar crimes often resulted in lenient sentences in minimum security facilities. I wanted him convicted of premeditated attempted murder. I wanted him caught red-handed in the absolute final act of his monstrous conspiracy. Victor pulled out a yellow legal pad and began writing down a tactical timeline. He explained that having the cloned hard drive and the audio recordings was fantastic, but a highly expensive defense attorney could try to argue that the audio was taken out of context or that the offshore accounts were just poor business investments. To ensure an airtight, undeniable conviction, we needed absolute, undeniable physical proof. We needed the police to physically catch Derek in possession of the illegal pills. We needed them to catch him actively trying to plant that evidence in Rachel's belongings. We had to force his hand and make him execute the final stage of his plan under our complete surveillance. I leaned over the table and told Victor that I was entirely ready to be the bait. Derek was waiting for my heart to finally give out. He was waiting for the massive dose of stimulants to trigger a fatal cardiac event. I told Victor that we needed to give him exactly what he wanted. We needed to stage a massive, convincing medical emergency. If Derek believed that his poison had finally worked, he would immediately launch the second phase of his plan. He would scramble to retrieve the remaining sedatives and plant them at Rachel's house before the authorities began asking questions. Victor agreed, but he warned me that the performance had to be absolutely flawless. If Derek suspected for a single second that it was a setup, he would destroy the remaining pills, hire a team of lawyers, and immediately flee the country using the 15 millions he stole. We had one single shot to trap him tonight, and the timing had to be calculated down to the precise second. Victor began making encrypted phone calls right there in the warehouse. He reached out to a trusted team of private emergency medical technicians he had worked with during his federal agency days. These were highly trained professionals who operated outside the standard city dispatch system, specializing in secure medical transports and tactical operations. Victor arranged for a fully equipped ambulance to be stationed just 2 blocks away from my house. He explained that when I gave the signal, I would fake a massive collapse. The private medical team would arrive within minutes, secure me on a stretcher, and rush me to a private, secure wing of a local hospital where the staff had already been briefed on the undercover operation. Derek would watch me get carried out of the house, fully believing that his assassination attempt had been a complete success. In the chaos of the moment, his arrogance would take over. He would leave the hospital to plant the evidence, stepping right into the jaws of the federal trap Victor was currently building with extreme, absolute precision. As the sun began to set over Austin, I left the warehouse and drove back to my empty house. The silence inside the living room felt different this time. It felt like the calm before a massive storm. I walked into the kitchen and looked up at the tiny invisible camera hidden in the air vent. I knew Victor was watching from his command center, ready to monitor every single movement. I walked into my bedroom and laid down on the mattress, staring up at the ceiling. Tomorrow, I was going to die. I was going to let my heart stop, let my body fail, and let my treacherous son-in-law believe he had conquered my family. But from the ashes of that fake death, the real Bill Gallagher was going to rise and unleash pure hell. I closed my eyes and practiced my breathing, preparing my mind for the absolute most important acting role of my entire life. The stage was set, the trap was loaded, and the monster was about to walk right through the front door. We were going to make sure he never walked out as a free man ever again in his pathetic life. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and splashed cold water on my face. The reflection staring back at me was no longer a victim. It was a man going to war. I took gray chalk and lightly dusted it under my eyes, giving my skin a pallid appearance. I wore loose pajamas and intentionally unbuttoned the top 2 buttons. My secure phone buzzed. Victor texted confirming his private medical team was parked in an unmarked van 3 streets away. They were monitoring the hidden audio feeds and waiting for the exact code word. When I said the word freezing, they would activate their sirens and roll to my address. At 9 o'clock, I heard Derek's heavy SUV pulling into my driveway. I moved to the kitchen island and leaned heavily against the marble counter, clutching my chest. The front door unlocked, and Derek walked in carrying a brown paper bag from a local bakery. He called out my name with that sickeningly cheerful voice. I did not answer immediately. I let out a low groan and poured myself a glass of water with trembling hands. He rounded the corner and stopped in his tracks. For a fraction of a second, I saw his eyes light up. He saw the gray chalk on my face, the heavy sweat I had misted on my forehead, and the sheer exhaustion in my posture. He thought the massive dose of stimulants had finally pushed my heart to the absolute breaking point. He rushed over and placed a hand on my shoulder, asking if I was feeling all right. I looked at him, letting my eyes glaze over. I told him my chest felt incredibly tight, like a heavy iron band was crushing my ribs. He guided me to the living room sofa, his touch gentle but his energy buzzing with suppressed excitement. He asked if I had taken my morning pills. I nodded weakly and pointed to the empty pill organizer on the counter. I told him I swallowed them just a few minutes ago. I watched his Adam's apple bob as he swallowed hard. He knew that the massive lethal dose was now supposedly dissolving in my stomach. All he had to do was wait for the grand finale. I began to breathe in short, shallow gasps. I clutched the fabric of my shirt over my heart. I let my head fall back against the sofa cushions and began to thrash my legs slightly. Derek stepped back. He did not reach for his phone. He did not call out for help. He just stood there, towering over me, watching me suffer with a look of cold, clinical fascination. I needed to push the performance to the absolute edge. I squeezed my eyes shut, groaned loudly in agony, and deliberately rolled off the edge of the sofa, crashing heavily onto the living room rug. I writhed on the floor, clutching my left arm. Derek knelt down beside me. He leaned in incredibly close. His voice was no longer sweet or comforting. It was an icy whisper. He told me to just let go. He said it was time for me to finally rest, assuring me that he would take excellent care of my company and my daughter. He was practically whispering my eulogy while he thought I was dying. I opened my eyes slightly, looking up at his monstrous face, and forced out a choked whisper. I said I was freezing. I am freezing cold. That was the code word. Instantly, I heard the wail of ambulance sirens echoing down the quiet suburban street. The sound pierced the morning air, growing louder and closer with terrifying speed. Derek stood up abruptly, looking deeply confused and panicked. He had not called emergency services yet. He intended to let me die completely before calling the authorities to report a natural tragedy. He ran to the front window just as the ambulance violently screeched to a halt in my driveway. Red and white emergency lights flooded the living room walls. The front door burst open, and 3 large paramedics wearing dark blue uniforms rushed inside, carrying heavy medical bags and a portable defibrillator. These were Victor's men. They moved with military precision. They pushed Derek forcefully out of the way, barking orders and acting as if they were fighting to save my life. One paramedic slapped a rigid oxygen mask over my face, while another ripped open my pajama shirt to attach electrocardiogram sensors to my chest. Derek hovered in the background, demanding to know who called them. One of the paramedics, a tall man with a thick beard, shouted that a neighbor heard screaming and flagged them down while they were driving back from another call. It was a flawless lie delivered with the intense adrenaline of a real medical emergency. They hoisted me onto a collapsible stretcher, strapping my arms and legs down tightly. I kept my eyes completely shut, keeping my body limp and lifeless. As they wheeled me toward the front door, Derek grabbed the paramedic's arm. He insisted on riding in the ambulance with me, playing the role of the devoted son-in-law once again. The bearded paramedic physically shoved him back, stating that standard protocol for critical cardiac events strictly prohibited family members from riding in the back. He told Derek to follow them in his own car to the private cardiac wing at Austin General. It was exactly what we needed. Derek was left standing in the doorway, watching the ambulance doors slam shut. As the vehicle sped away with sirens blaring, I knew he was not going to follow us immediately. He had a very specific dark job left to do. He had to go into my kitchen, grab the remaining toxic pills, and drive directly to Rachel's house to securely plant the physical evidence that would permanently destroy her life. The trap was perfectly set, and the rat was finally in the cage. The ride to Austin General took less than 12 minutes. The paramedics wheeled me through a discreet rear entrance used exclusively for secure transfers. They bypassed the chaotic public emergency room, entirely rolling my stretcher straight into a designated private suite on the 4th floor. Victor was already waiting inside. He wore a crisp white doctor's coat over his dark clothing, perfectly playing the role of a senior attending physician. With rapid precision, his undercover medical team moved me from the stretcher to the comfortable hospital bed. They attached a complex series of medical leads to my chest and arms, connecting them directly to a sophisticated heart monitor. But the machine was not reading my actual vitals. It was a completely simulated digital program designed specifically to display a dangerously weak, erratic heartbeat and incredibly low blood pressure. The steady, slow beep of the machine filled the sterile room. Victor adjusted the clear oxygen mask over my face and leaned down close to my ear. He whispered softly that the hidden cameras in the room were rolling, and the secure audio feed was crystal clear. We were perfectly ready for him. Now came the absolute hardest part of the entire operation. I had to lie perfectly still, keep my eyes firmly closed, and wait patiently. I had to consciously slow my breathing to match the tragic rhythm of a dying man. As I lay there in the dimly lit room, my mind was racing, miles away. I knew exactly what Derek was doing right at this very moment. He was sneaking inside Rachel's quiet house. He was quietly walking into her private bedroom, taking those toxic white capsules from his pocket and burying them deep inside her favorite purse. He was ruthlessly framing my innocent daughter for a brutal murder I was currently pretending to die from. The violent urge to rip the oxygen mask off my face, jump out of the bed, and drive straight over there to physically stop him was overwhelmingly powerful. But I knew that if I broke character now, the entire federal trap would completely fall apart. Victor already had highly trained agents positioned discreetly outside Rachel's house watching his every move. I forced my tense muscles to relax, sinking deeper into the hospital mattress, playing the comatose victim with unwavering dedication. 45 agonizing minutes later, the heavy wooden door of the hospital suite pushed open. I heard the familiar squeak of Derek's expensive leather shoes stepping onto the shiny linoleum floor. He walked slowly into the quiet room, pausing respectfully at the foot of my bed. Victor, flawlessly playing the role of the attending doctor, met him near the doorway. Derek spoke in a hushed, heavily trembling voice, desperately asking for a medical update on his beloved father-in-law. He sounded so incredibly devastated. Victor played his part brilliantly. He lowered his medical clipboard, looked Derek squarely in the eye, and delivered the grim, fabricated diagnosis. He stated that I had suffered a massive catastrophic myocardial infarction. He explained gravely that my aging brain had been deprived of essential oxygen for far too long, and that I had unfortunately slipped into a deep, irreversible coma. Victor added sadly that given my advanced age and severely weakened physical state, it was highly unlikely I would ever wake up again. He said it was truly only a matter of hours before my tired body completely shut down forever. Derek let out a shaky sigh, dramatically burying his face in his hands. He thanked the doctor profusely for doing everything humanly possible. Victor offered his professional condolences and politely stepped out of the room, softly closing the heavy door behind him. The very moment the metallic latch clicked shut, the entire atmosphere in the private suite shifted violently. The grieving son-in-law act evaporated instantly. I heard Derek walk much closer to the side of my bed. I could actually feel his body heat radiating near my face. He leaned over my body, his warm breath brushing directly against my cheek. When he finally spoke, his voice was completely devoid of any sorrow or fake empathy. It was absolutely dripping with a cold, venomous contempt. He angrily whispered that I was a stubborn old fool for taking so long to finally die. He mocked the way my face looked, calling me a pathetic relic. He told my supposedly comatose body that he had just returned from visiting Rachel. He cheerfully whispered that he had successfully hidden the rest of the illegal pills securely in her leather handbag. I kept my eyes shut tight purposefully, not reacting to a single word of his cruel confession. I listened closely as he eagerly unzipped his expensive leather briefcase. He pulled out a thick stack of legal papers and set them down directly on my white hospital blanket. I heard the sharp click of his gold fountain pen. He began rapidly flipping through the pages, confidently signing his name on multiple important documents. He was eagerly finalizing the ultimate power of attorney paperwork and the immediate execution of the lucrative family trust protocols. He was legally cementing his absolute total control over my entire business estate. He was completely convinced that the silent man lying in the bed was nothing more than a breathing corpse. He signed the final page with a heavy, deeply arrogant flourish. He smoothly slipped the legal documents back into his briefcase and zipped it shut with a loud, satisfying sound. He had officially won. In his twisted sociopathic mind, he had executed the absolute perfect crime. He had stolen my massive company, secured his offshore fortune, and framed his own innocent wife for my inevitable murder. Derek patted my frail shoulder one last time. He whispered a final mocking goodbye, telling me to enjoy hell. He turned sharply and walked confidently out of the hospital room. I finally opened my eyes. The arrogant monster had enthusiastically signed his own federal death warrant tonight. The heavy hospital door barely clicked shut before I sat straight up in the hospital bed. I ripped the simulated oxygen mask off my face and quickly peeled the sticky sensors from my tired chest. Victor stepped quietly into the room, carrying a sleek black tablet. He gave a sharp professional nod, confirming that Derek was currently walking out of the lobby and heading toward his vehicle. Victor tapped the screen, bringing up a live global positioning satellite feed. A small red dot blinked steadily on the map, tracking the device Victor placed on Derek's vehicle earlier. Derek was not driving to his suburban home to comfort his pregnant wife. The red dot moved swiftly toward the downtown district. He was heading straight for a high-end boutique hotel where his secret mistress Maya had rented a luxury suite to eagerly wait for his grand victory. Victor handed me fresh clothes. I shed the hospital gown, putting on dark trousers and a heavy sweater. We slipped through the secure rear exit, bypassing the main corridors, and climbed into an unmarked federal vehicle waiting in the alley. The drive downtown was tense and silent. My mind raced with the sheer audacity of Derek's lies. He had leaned over my bed, bragging about planting the pills in Rachel's purse, but Victor assured me his surveillance team reported zero activity. Derek lied to my comatose body simply to twist the knife one last time. He wanted to savor the cruelty of his plan before executing the final step. Arriving at the hotel, we took a service elevator to the 7th floor. Victor led me down a quiet hallway, knocking twice on room 704. A tall man in a dark suit opened the door. He was a senior field agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The hotel room had been transformed into a tactical surveillance command center. 3 federal agents wore headphones, sitting before a bank of glowing laptop screens. Thick cables snaked across the floor, connecting to a sophisticated audio receiver aimed at the shared wall. The adjacent room was occupied by Maya. Derek had walked through her door less than 5 minutes ago. Victor handed me a pair of noise-canceling headphones. I placed them over my ears and listened intently. The audio feed was incredibly clear, picking up clinking champagne glasses and soft music. Maya sounded absolutely thrilled. She asked Derek if the old man was finally dead. Derek laughed, a rich, genuine sound that made my stomach turn. He told her I was practically a corpse, hooked up to machines, and completely brain-dead. He proudly announced he successfully signed the power of attorney documents, securing total control over the corporate empire. Maya cheered loudly, praising his brilliant mind. She asked about the remaining toxic capsules and the plan to frame Rachel. I heard a heavy leather briefcase unzipping on a wooden table. Derek told Maya to lower her voice. He explained he brought the rest of the unprescribed sedatives with him to safely package them. He admitted he had not actually planted them at Rachel's house yet, because the timing had to be absolutely flawless. He needed Rachel completely distracted and emotionally broken before placing the evidence in her belongings. He detailed his schedule with chilling precision. He planned to wait until the hospital officially declared my death tomorrow morning. When Rachel broke down in hysterical tears over the news, he would offer to pack her an overnight bag. That was the precise moment he intended to slip the plastic bag of lethal white capsules deep into her personal purse, ensuring the police would find them. I listened to the rustling plastic through the headphones. The federal agent sitting next to me tapped his keyboard, capturing high-resolution thermal images through the wall. The screen clearly showed Derek standing by the table, methodically counting the remaining pills and dropping them into a clear Ziploc bag. Every single word he spoke was recorded and permanently cataloged as federal evidence. He was actively demonstrating possession of highly restricted schedule drugs, confirming his premeditated intent to distribute a lethal substance, and explicitly detailing a complex conspiracy to frame an innocent woman for murder. The federal agents exchanged deeply satisfied looks. They had everything they needed to put him away for decades. But Derek was not finished speaking. He told Maya they needed to act the part of the grieving family for a few more weeks. He instructed her to quietly pack up the Dallas penthouse. He promised her that by the end of the month, Rachel would be sitting in a cold jail cell, and they would board a private jet to the Cayman Islands. He kissed her loudly, completely unaware that heavily armed federal agents were sitting just a few mere inches away, documenting his entire confession. I slowly took the headphones off, handing them back to Victor. The anger boiling inside me had finally crystallized into absolute, unwavering resolve. We had the smoking gun. We had the complete digital confession safely secured. We had the physical proof securely bagged. The only thing left to do was drop the heavy hammer down hard. I looked at the lead federal agent carefully, asking what the exact next step was. He smiled a tight, professional smile. He said they could easily kick the wooden door down right now and arrest him immediately. I shook my tired head firmly. I told them arresting him in a quiet hotel room with his mistress was simply not enough punishment. I wanted him to feel the exact same massive public humiliation and total emotional devastation he intended to ruthlessly inflict on my completely innocent daughter. I wanted to permanently break him in front of his friends and the entire world. Victor nodded slowly, understanding my intention completely. The trap was finally ready to snap shut, and I was going to be the one to enthusiastically pull the heavy steel lever to finally finish him. We left the hotel room and drove back to Austin General under the cover of darkness. I sneaked back into the private hospital wing, slipping into the sterile gown and reconnecting the simulated monitor leads. I had to wait through the long night staring at the ceiling, picturing the absolute shock that would soon cross Derek's face. When morning finally broke, shedding pale light through the hospital blinds, it was time to orchestrate my miraculous resurrection. Victor walked into the room at 8 o'clock sharp, carrying his medical clipboard. He dialed Rachel's number, putting the phone on speaker. When she answered, her voice was thick with exhaustion and grief. Victor introduced himself as the attending physician and delivered the impossible news. He told her that against all medical logic and scientific probability, I had stabilized overnight. He said my brain function had returned to normal and I had completely woken up from the coma. I heard Rachel drop the phone. I heard her sobbing, uncontrollably screaming for Derek. 30 minutes later, the heavy suite door swung open. Rachel ran into the room, throwing her arms around me and burying her face in my neck. She cried tears of profound joy, thanking God for giving me a second chance. I held my daughter tightly, kissing her forehead, feeling a fierce protective energy surge through my veins. Then I looked over her shoulder. Derek was standing in the doorway. The color had completely drained from his face. His jaw was clenched so tight, I thought his teeth might shatter. For a fleeting second, I saw raw, unfiltered panic in his eyes. He had signed the power of attorney documents. He had bragged to his mistress. He had bagged the remaining poison. And now the corpse was sitting up in bed, hugging his wife. But Derek was a sociopath, and sociopaths adapt quickly. He forced a wide, trembling smile onto his face and rushed forward, grabbing my hand and kissing my knuckles. He told me it was the greatest miracle he had ever witnessed. I looked deeply into his eyes, matching his fake enthusiasm. I told him I felt like I had been given a new lease on life. I played the part of a man who had seen the other side and realized what truly mattered. I turned to Rachel and told her that surviving this ordeal made me realize I could not miss her upcoming 10th wedding anniversary gala. The massive event was scheduled for tomorrow evening at the most exclusive country club in Austin. Rachel immediately protested, wiping her tears. She said the gala was completely unimportant now and that she would cancel the entire banquet to stay home and care for me. I firmly shook my head, grabbing her hands. I told her that seeing her celebrate a decade of beautiful marriage with the man she loved was the only medicine I needed. I insisted that attending their anniversary was my absolute dying wish, slightly correcting myself to say it was my greatest living wish. I slowly shifted my gaze back to Derek. I told him I wanted to stand beside him, raise a glass of champagne, and publicly honor the incredible husband he had been to my daughter. I watched the gears Sao's turning violently behind his dark eyes. He was rapidly calculating the risks and the unprecedented opportunities. If I attended a highly public, deeply emotional, exhausting social event surrounded by hundreds of prominent guests, it would provide the absolute perfect cover story for my sudden demise. Everyone in Austin would see the frail, sick old man pushing himself entirely too hard for the love of his family. When my heart inevitably gave out later that same night, nobody would question it. They would simply say the excitement and the physical strain of the gala had been too much for my weakened cardiovascular system. It was an absolutely flawless alibi. A subtle, sinister smirk tugged at the very corner of Derek's mouth. He placed a reassuring hand on Rachel's shoulder, playing the voice of reason. He softly told her that we should not deny me this profound joy. He promised her he would personally ensure I had a comfortable chair, a private resting area, and that we would leave the moment I felt tired. Rachel reluctantly agreed, leaning her head against his chest, completely blind to the venom pumping through his heart. Victor, maintaining his doctor persona, strictly advised that I be released into Derek's direct care under the absolute condition that I take my medication and avoid severe stress. Derek enthusiastically promised to monitor my pills closely. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. He wheeled me out of the hospital himself, pushing the chair with a terrifyingly gentle touch. He believed the execution was simply delayed by 48 hours. When I returned to my quiet house, I spent the afternoon resting, gathering every ounce of my physical and mental strength. Victor sent a secure message confirming that his federal agents were already infiltrating the country club, catering staff, and security detail. The entire ballroom was being quietly wired with hidden high-definition cameras and directional microphones. I walked into my walk-in closet and pulled out my finest custom-tailored tuxedo. I ran my hands over the dark, heavy fabric. I had worn this exact suit to their wedding 10 years ago, walking Rachel down the aisle and handing her over to a monster. It was only fitting that I wear the exact same suit to completely destroy him. Tomorrow night, under the glittering chandeliers and the watchful eyes of Austin high society, the final act of this tragedy would unfold. The trap was perfectly laid, the bait was dressed, and the predator was arrogantly sharpening his knives. He thought he was the undeniable master of his carefully constructed universe, utterly blind to the absolute hellfire that was rapidly descending upon him. I turned off the bedroom light and smiled. I was ready. The next evening arrived with a heavy, suffocating humidity that was typical of a Texas summer. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in my bedroom and adjusted the black silk bow tie around my collar. The custom-tailored tuxedo fit me perfectly, exactly as it had 10 years ago. I took a deep, steady breath, feeling the solid, heavy weight of the silver flash drive resting safely in my inside jacket pocket. Tonight was the night. I walked out of my house and climbed into the back of the black town car I had hired for the evening. The drive to the exclusive Austin Country Club took 30 minutes, but it felt like an absolute eternity. When the driver pulled up to the grand entrance, a valet rushed forward to open my door. I immediately slumped my shoulders, leaned heavily on a polished wooden cane I had bought that morning, and put on the face of a dying man. The country club was a spectacular display of extreme wealth and privilege. Massive crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceilings, casting a warm golden light over the 200 guests gathered in the main ballroom. These were the elite members of Austin society. There were oil tycoons, influential politicians, corporate executives, and all the board members of my logistics company. They were all dressed in their absolute best, drinking expensive champagne and laughing politely. As I slowly shuffled into the grand ballroom, the lively chatter began to die down. People parted to make way for me, offering deeply sympathetic smiles and hushed whispers. They all thought they were looking at a ghost. Rachel quickly spotted me from across the room and immediately rushed over, her gorgeous silk evening gown flowing behind her. She wrapped her arms around my neck, kissing my cheek, and thanking me for finding the strength to come. Derek was right behind her, wearing a sharp velvet tuxedo jacket and holding a crystal glass of whiskey. He placed a warm, incredibly firm hand on my shoulder, playing the part of the protective patriarch. He guided me to a plush armchair situated perfectly at the front table directly near the main stage. He told me to rest and promised to fetch me some sparkling water. I sat down and gripped the handle of my cane, watching him walk away. He was working the room like a seasoned politician. He shook hands with my former business partners, kissing the cheeks of their wives, and graciously accepting their premature condolences about my failing health. He was entirely in his element, basking in the glowing admiration of a community he was actively preparing to rob blind. I looked around the room and noticed the subtle, comforting presence of Victor's federal agents. They were dressed as waiters, security guards, and audio technicians. One of them, a tall man in a crisp white catering uniform, caught my eye and gave a nearly imperceptible nod. The trap was fully armed. An hour passed in a blur of clinking glasses and rich, extravagant food. As the dinner service concluded, the lights in the grand ballroom dimmed slightly. A soft spotlight illuminated the main stage, and Derek walked confidently up to the wooden podium. The crowd immediately grew completely silent, offering him their absolute, undivided attention. He adjusted the microphone, looked out over the sea of faces, and offered a beautifully crafted, highly emotional smile. He began his speech by thanking everyone for coming to celebrate a decade of marriage to the most incredible woman in the world. He spoke eloquently about the day he met Rachel, the beautiful family they were building together, and the deep, enduring love that guided his every single decision. Rachel sat beside me, dabbing her tear-filled eyes with a white cloth napkin. She reached over and squeezed my hand, completely moved by her husband's beautiful words. Then Derek's voice shifted. The cheerful tone vanished, replaced by a heavy manufactured sorrow. He looked directly down at my table, letting his eyes meet mine. He told the silent crowd that tonight was not just about celebrating the past 10 years. He said it was also about honoring the profound legacy of a man who had built this incredible family. He pointed to me, and the spotlight suddenly shifted, illuminating my frail posture for the entire ballroom to see. He spoke about my sudden tragic illness and the terrifying phone calls from the hospital. Derek gripped the edges of the podium, letting a fake tear glisten under the stage lights. He told the audience that watching his beloved father-in-law suffer so terribly had been the hardest challenge of his entire life. He praised my strength, my 40 years of relentless hard work, and my absolute dedication to providing for my family. He promised the crowd, and he promised me directly, that he would carry the torch of my logistics company with the exact same honor and integrity that I had always shown. He declared that he would protect Rachel and their children from any storm, no matter how severe. He asked every single guest in the massive room to raise their glasses, to toast a man whose time was tragically drawing to a close, but whose incredible spirit would live on forever through the company. 200 people slowly stood up in unison. They raised their crystal glasses high in the air, their faces solemn and deeply respectful. Derek raised his glass of whiskey, locking eyes with me. Behind that perfect grieving mask, I could see the pure, arrogant triumph shining brightly. He genuinely believed this was my final public appearance. He thought I would go home tonight, take his poisoned pills, and never wake up again. He thought he had absolutely won the war. I slowly stood up from my chair, leaning heavily on my wooden cane. I proudly raised my glass of sparkling water toward the stage. I looked up and smiled right back at him. I took a sip of the sparkling water and immediately doubled over, producing a violent, agonizing coughing fit that echoed loudly across the front tables. Rachel jumped up from her seat in a complete panic, her hands fluttering over my shoulders. Derek quickly stepped down from the stage, his face masking absolute glee with a look of deep, profound concern. He grabbed my arm, offering to escort me to the private resting area we had arranged earlier. I weakly shook my head, waving him off with a trembling hand. I whispered hoarsely that I just needed a few minutes of quiet air in the main lobby to catch my breath. Derek nodded solemnly, playing the incredibly compassionate host. He turned to the concerned audience, raising his hands gently to calm the murmurs, and smoothly urged everyone to continue enjoying the spectacular dinner while his father-in-law rested. He returned to the stage, completely convinced that my physical collapse was finally happening exactly as he had orchestrated. I gripped my wooden cane, dragging my feet across the plush carpet as I slowly made my way out of the grand ballroom. The heavy mahogany doors clicked shut behind me, completely sealing off the noise of the elegant party. The moment the brass latch clicked, the tired, dying old man entirely vanished. I stood up perfectly straight, feeling the satisfying pop in my lower back. I tossed the wooden cane carelessly into a nearby decorative potted plant. I rolled my shoulders back, taking a deep, powerful breath of the cool lobby air. I smoothed down the lapels of my dark custom tuxedo, ensuring every single crease was flawlessly sharp. I looked toward the main entrance of the country club. Victor was standing there, no longer dressed as a medical professional. He wore a crisp, dark federal suit, a gold badge gleaming prominently on his belt. Behind him stood 6 heavily armed federal agents, their faces carved from absolute stone. They moved silently across the marble floor, forming a tight, impenetrable tactical formation directly behind me. Victor handed me a small, sleek, digital remote control. He gave me a sharp, confident nod. The final stage was completely set. We waited in the quiet lobby for precisely 3 minutes, allowing Derek to return to his podium and continue his arrogant victory speech. Through the thick wooden doors, I could hear his booming, confident voice echoing over the microphone, promising the wealthy guests that he would lead my company into a bright, incredibly profitable new future. I placed my hands flat against the heavy wooden double doors of the grand ballroom. I pushed them open with a sudden, violent force. The heavy doors slammed loudly against the interior walls, producing a deafening crack that instantly silenced the entire room. The lively chatter evaporated. The clinking of expensive crystal glasses completely stopped. 200 wealthy guests turned their heads simultaneously toward the back of the room. I stepped directly into the warm, golden light of the massive chandeliers. I was not slouching. I was not trembling. I walked with the heavy, undeniable authority of a man who had built a massive empire from the unforgiving Texas dirt. I walked with the fierce, unyielding posture of a father protecting his only child. Victor matched my pace exactly on my right side, while the grim federal agents fanned out smoothly to securely block every single exit in the ballroom. The visual impact of my sudden physical transformation was absolutely staggering. The guests stared in open, completely undisguised shock. Whispers rippled frantically through the crowd as they helplessly tried to process how the frail, dying man from 5 minutes ago was now marching down the center aisle like a conquering general. I kept my eyes locked directly on the stage. Derek was completely frozen behind the wooden podium. His handsome face was completely drained of all color, leaving his skin a sickly pale gray. His mouth hung slightly open, entirely incapable of forming a single coherent word. The arrogant, triumphant spark in his dark eyes had been instantly replaced by pure, unadulterated terror. He gripped the edges of the podium so tightly, his knuckles turned completely white, as if the wooden stand was the only thing keeping his trembling legs from completely collapsing underneath him. Rachel stood up from her front row table, her hands covering her mouth in sheer disbelief. She looked from me to the heavily armed federal agents, completely bewildered by the surreal scene unfolding before her. I gently placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder as I passed her table, silently promising her that everything would be explained soon. I did not stop moving until I reached the short wooden stairs leading up to the main stage. I walked up the short wooden steps with heavy, deliberate precision, my eyes locked onto his pale face. I stepped directly into his personal space, standing just mere inches away from the man who had actively tried to murder me. Derek was physically shaking now, a fine, uncontrollable tremor vibrating through his entire body. He tried to speak, attempting to desperately formulate a charming lie, but only a pathetic, broken gasp escaped his dry throat. I did not say a single word to him. I simply reached out and firmly pried the black microphone out of his cold, damp hands. I turned my back to him, facing the completely silent, utterly captivated audience. The large room was so quiet, you could easily hear a pin drop on the soft carpet. I looked out over the vast sea of my closest friends, my trusted business partners, and my deeply confused, innocent daughter. I held the microphone tightly, purposely letting the heavy, suffocating silence stretch for a few agonizing seconds. I wanted Derek to feel the crushing weight of his sudden destruction. I slowly pressed the button on the small digital remote activating the projector screens. I raised the microphone to my lips. It was finally time to bury him. I looked at the sea of faces, my voice booming through the powerful sound system of the grand ballroom. I told them that 10 years ago I stood at an altar and handed my only daughter to a man I believed was honorable. I said that I had welcomed him into my home, my family, and my company with an open heart. But the man standing behind me was not a husband, and he was certainly not a leader. He was a parasite. The crowd gasped softly, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Derek tried to desperately grab the microphone from my hand, but Victor stepped forward. He placed a heavy hand squarely on Derek's chest, forcefully pushing him back against the wooden podium. I told the audience that for the past month I had not been suffering from a natural illness. I had been systematically and intentionally poisoned by the very man who just asked them to raise their glasses. A collective murmur of shock rippled through the wealthy guests. Derek stammered, his voice cracking violently as he yelled into the room that I was delusional, that the dementia had completely taken over my mind. I did not argue with him. I simply pressed the second button on my remote control. The two massive projector screens flanking the main stage suddenly illuminated the dark room. They did not display a slideshow of happy memories. They displayed a stark black background with a bright green audio waveform. I pointed to the screens and told everyone to listen very carefully to the true sound of a monster. The audio recording from the hotel room began to play through the state-of-the-art surround sound speakers. Derek's voice, crystal clear and dripping with cruel arrogance, filled every single corner of the ballroom. The guests heard him laughing with his secret mistress Maya. They heard him explicitly brag about swapping my heart medication with lethal sedatives. They heard him proudly confirm the $15 million he had stolen and transferred to the Cayman Islands. The atmosphere in the room turned to pure, suffocating horror. Prominent business leaders dropped their champagne glasses, the crystal shattering loudly against the marble floor. Wives covered their mouths, tears of revulsion welling in their eyes. But the absolute worst was yet to come. The recording continued broadcasting Derek's ultimate master plan. His voice echoed over the crowd, detailing exactly how he was going to plant the remaining toxic pills into Rachel's purse. The audience listened in stunned, paralyzed silence as he gleefully explained how he would frame his own pregnant wife for my murder, send her to federal prison for decades, and take sole custody of their children just to collect a $5 million life insurance payout. The moment Rachel's name was mentioned on the recording, a piercing, agonizing scream tore through the ballroom. It was a sound of such profound, earth-shattering heartbreak that it will haunt my memory forever. Rachel collapsed onto her knees beside the front table, clutching her stomach as the reality of her husband's pure evil crushed her soul. Derek realized instantly that his entire life was over. The flawless facade he had spent 10 years carefully building had just been incinerated in front of the most powerful people in Texas. He looked wildly around the room, his eyes darting toward the side exit near the kitchen doors. Driven by the frantic adrenaline of a cornered predator, Derek lunged off the side of the stage. He shoved a waiter out of the way, sending a tray of silver plates crashing to the ground, and desperately sprinted toward the swinging doors. He did not make it more than 15 feet. Two massive federal agents intercepted him with the speed and brutal force of a freight train. They hit him simultaneously from both sides, lifting his polished shoes off the carpet. They slammed him face first into the hard dance floor with a sickening thud. Derek's nose shattered on impact, leaving a bright trail of crimson blood smeared across the polished wood. He thrashed and kicked, screaming obscenities and demanding his lawyers, but the agents were absolutely merciless. One agent planted a heavy knee directly between his shoulder blades, completely pinning him to the ground, while the other violently wrenched his arms behind his back. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs echoing through the silent ballroom sounded like absolute music to my ears. Victor walked slowly down the stage stairs, standing over the bleeding, broken man. He pulled out his federal badge and formally advised Derek that he was under immediate arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, massive wire fraud, and the possession of restricted schedule drugs. I dropped the microphone onto the stage, no longer caring about the stunned crowd or the whispering executives. I rushed down the stairs as fast as my legs could carry me and threw myself onto the floor next to my daughter. Rachel was hyperventilating, her body shaking with uncontrollable violent sobs. She kept repeating that it could not be true, that it had to be a nightmare. I wrapped my arms tightly around her trembling shoulders, pulling her head firmly against my chest. I rocked her gently back and forth right there on the floor of the country club, shielding her eyes from the gruesome sight of her husband being roughly dragged away in chains. I stroked her hair and kissed her head, whispering that she was safe now that the monster was finally gone forever, and that I would never let anyone hurt her children ever again. The guests slowly backed away toward the exits, giving our broken family a wide circle of respectful privacy as the agents efficiently cleared the building. I held my weeping daughter tightly against my heart, feeling the terrible weight of the past month begin to lift from my weary shoulders. We had survived the darkest betrayal imaginable, and now the long process of true healing could finally begin. The days following the anniversary gala were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and federal investigations. The dramatic arrest at the country club became the biggest news story in Texas, completely destroying any lingering shred of Derek's carefully crafted public image. He was stripped of his tailored suits and forced to wear a bright orange jumpsuit, locked inside a maximum security federal holding facility. His expensive defense attorneys desperately tried to negotiate a plea deal, offering to return the stolen money in exchange for a lighter sentence. But the federal prosecutors, armed with Victor's meticulously gathered evidence, the cloned hard drive, and the damning audio recordings, absolutely refused to show any mercy. Derek faced a mountain of irrefutable charges, including conspiracy to commit murder, massive corporate wire fraud, and the possession of highly restricted schedule drugs with the explicit intent to harm a senior citizen. The judge presiding over his trial was absolutely disgusted by the sheer, calculated cruelty of his master plan. Derek was sentenced to 40 years in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. He will spend the rest of his natural life staring at concrete walls, completely stripped of the wealth and status he tried so ruthlessly to steal. His secret mistress Maya did not escape justice either, when the federal agents raided her luxury penthouse in Dallas. They found her frantically trying to pack her bags and book a one-way flight out of the country. She was immediately arrested and charged as a willing co-conspirator in the massive wire fraud scheme. The federal government swiftly seized the $15 million sitting in the offshore Cayman Islands account, officially returning every single penny directly back to my logistics company. The nightmare was legally over. With Derek's fraud fully exposed, my team of corporate lawyers easily invalidated the 80% share transfer I had signed under the heavy influence of his toxic chemical cocktail. The legal documents were officially voided, and I was fully reinstated as the sole majority owner and chief executive officer of the empire I had built. Walking back into my corporate boardroom for the first time since my fake retirement was a profoundly emotional experience. The heavy mahogany doors swung open, and the entire executive board stood up, offering a deeply respectful round of applause. I took my rightful seat at the head of the massive table, breathing in the familiar scent of polished wood and fresh coffee. But this time I did not sit alone. I pulled out the heavy leather chair directly to my right and invited my daughter Rachel to sit beside me. She was no longer the naive, trusting wife who had been blinded by a sociopathic predator. She had survived a devastating emotional trauma and emerged from the ashes stronger, wiser, and fiercely determined to protect her children. I decided that I was not going to run the company forever, but I was also not going to hand it over to another outsider. I am spending every single day actively training Rachel to take the reins. She is learning the intricate details of the oil logistics business, negotiating contracts with a sharp, uncompromising edge that makes me incredibly proud. She filed for an expedited divorce, secured absolute sole custody of my grandson Leo and her beautiful newborn baby girl, and legally severed every single tie to the monster who tried to destroy us. Our house is filled with laughter again. The heavy, suffocating fog of deception has been completely lifted, replaced by the warm, authentic light of a family that has truly survived the ultimate test. Looking back on this horrific ordeal, I realize that the greatest danger we face does not always come from strangers lurking in the dark shadows. Sometimes the most vicious wolves are the ones we willingly invite into our living rooms, the ones who smile warmly, pour our coffee, and pretend to care for us. I learned that age and illness can make you vulnerable, but they do not make you powerless. You must always trust your instincts. If something feels fundamentally wrong in your own home, do not ignore it to keep the peace. Dig deeper, watch closely, and never be afraid to defend your life and your legacy with absolutely everything you have. Blood and marriage ties are not enough to justify blind trust, and the family you actively choose to protect is sometimes far stronger than the family you were given. I learned that the hard way, so you do not have to. I stood up to the man who thought I was just a clueless old man ready to die, and I completely took my life back. The journey to this peaceful morning was filled with terrifying risks, but every single sleepless night was entirely worth it. I look at my brave daughter and my precious grandchildren, knowing their entire future is finally completely secure. The toxic threat that once slept under our very roof has been permanently removed, locked away behind cold steel bars, where he can never harm another innocent soul again. My legacy is no longer just a massive logistics company or a healthy bank account. My true legacy is the undeniable strength I instilled in Rachel, teaching her how to relentlessly fight back against those who seek to ruthlessly exploit kindness. We rebuilt our beautiful lives on a foundation of absolute truth, unwavering courage, and pure protective love. Thank you for listening to my story. And if it helped you in any way, if it gave you perspective or courage to face your own situation, please do share it. Because somewhere someone else is being used by family and needs to know that they are not alone, that they can successfully defend themselves, and that survival is possible. Blood is not enough to justify abuse. Love is not enough without respect. Do not forget to send a super thanks if my story gave you courage. See you in the next life story.